Have you ever been scrolling late at night? You see friends living their best lives on some perfect beach, or maybe watching someone else hit a goal, and you just feel that sudden anxious punch in the gut,
Oh, yeah.
that nagging, really uncomfortable certainty that you should be doing something else, somewhere else, with, I don't know, better people.
It's so much like chasing the golden snitch in Quidditch, isn't it? It's always just hovering there, just out of reach, and it promises this huge reward, but the actual chase is just, it's exhausting.
And most of the time, that snitch is just a perfectly filtered Instagram story.
Exactly.
That pressure, that feeling we all now call the fear of missing out or FOMO, it's become so universal that it's now a really profound area of scientific inquiry. We're not just treating it as a trend today, we were going deep into the science.
We are. For you, we've synthesized a pretty exhaustive literature survey that tracks FOMO all the way from just a colloquial term to a robust psychological construct. We're looking at its neurobiological roots and its measurable, often really severe behavioral consequences.
So what's our mission for this deep dive?
Our mission is to unpack the core mechanisms, measure the real-world costs to your mental and physical health, and I think most importantly, explore the evidence-based solutions that can actually help you regain some control.
Okay, so to start, we have to ground ourselves in the formal academic definition, because this wasn't just some marketing catchphrase. It was formalized back in 2013 by a researcher named Andrew Przybilski and his colleagues.
Right, at the University of Oxford. And they defined FOMO as a pervasive apprehension that others might be having rewarding experiences from which one is absent.
Pervasive apprehension. That really captures it.
It does. And what's key for you to understand is that FOMO is really a two-step process. First, you have the perception of missing out, just the belief that something better is happening without you.
And the second step.
The second, and this is crucial, is the compulsive behavioral component. That's the irresistible, anxiety-driven urge to constantly check your phone, your social feeds, your texts, all to try and relieve that feeling of being left out.
So it's not just the feeling, it's the action that follows. That's what really traps us.
That's the loop.
So while the internet obviously amplified this feeling 1,000 times over, this kind of social anxiety, it isn't new. Where did this all officially start?
You're right. The underlying pressures are ancient. We are tribal creatures. But the actual phrase, fear of missing out, was introduced way back in 1996 by a marketing expert, a guy named Dan Herman.
So not a psychologist, a marketing expert.
Right. He was linking it to consumer behavior. He was suggesting it was the drive to, exhaust all your options before you make a commitment.
So it started as a way to sell things, not as a diagnosis for anxiety.
Precisely. And the acronym we all know, FOMO, that first showed up in 2004. It was in the Harvard Business School's magazine, The Harbus.
Wow. And then by 2013, it was in the dictionary.
Yep. Made it into the Oxford English Dictionary. That is a remarkably fast track from, business school slang to mainstream psychological relevance.
So the science shows this feeling is rooted in something much, much deeper than just scrolling. You mentioned the most robust framework for understanding why FOMO takes hold is something called self-determination theory, or SDT.
That's right.
How does a basic psychological theory like that explain such a modern digital thing?
Well, SDT is highly respected in psychology, and it argues that all humans have three basic, sort of innate psychological needs. And when these needs are chronically frustrated or unmet, that's when we become vulnerable to these external anxieties.
Okay, so what are those three fundamental needs that the internet is so good at exploiting?
So first is relatedness. This is just the fundamental need to belong, to feel cared for, to have real close emotional connections.
Okay.
Second is competence. That's the need to feel effective, capable, to feel like you have some mastery over your world. And third is autonomy, which is the need to feel in control of your own decisions.
So if I'm feeling disconnected, that's low relatedness, or I feel like I'm feeling to keep up with everyone, that's low competence. I become psychologically fragile.
You got it. When those foundational pillars are shaky, we start looking for external validation almost desperately. And where do you go to find fast, superficial validation?
Social media.
Social media. And this is where social comparison theory kicks in, which was pioneered by Leon Festinger all the way back in 1954.
And back then, comparison was just your immediate neighborhood or your workplace. Now it's a 247 global performance.
And it's a performance based on what researchers call curated online representations.
Yeah.
You are only seeing the highlight reel.
Right.
If we look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, for example, you are seeing Captain America's perfect, heroic, public image.
But you're not seeing the internal struggles, the disagreements, the massive failures, or all the personal baggage that comes with that life.
Exactly. Online, you just see the public-facing perfection. And because of that, we're almost always engaging in what the research calls upward social comparisons.
We're constantly comparing ourselves to people we perceive as better off. We're looking up at this impossible peak, not across at the messy reality. And that just leaves us feeling inadequate.
And that feeling of inadequacy is incredibly common, especially among younger people. The data shows somewhere between 50 to 70% of general social media users experience FOMO regularly.
Wow. And it peaks with a certain age group.
It does. It peaks sharply in the late teens and early 20s. Generation Z shows the highest levels, with over 70% reporting they experience FOMO on a regular basis. Millennials are right behind them at 69%.
And I guess Gen Z has been sort of marinating in this environment their whole lives.
Their entire social development, which makes them particularly sensitive to that social comparison trap.
Okay, so let's move from the psychological engine to the actual hardware. I mean, where in the brain does this anxiety even register? The research mentions a structural change, something about reduced gray matter volume, which that sounds incredibly serious.
It is, and this is where we get the neurobiological wow factor. The research associates high FOMO with a specific change in the brain's structure, reduced gray matter volume in the striatum.
The striatum, that's a key part of the basal ganglia, isn't it? It's tied to habits, reward processing, impulse control.
Exactly. So reduced volume here fundamentally alters how the brain anticipates and processes rewards. It means the brain is just less effective at regulating habits.
Which connects directly to the compulsive checking part of FOMO.
It does. Your brain is wired to seek that little reward of a notification, but the striatum's efficiency is compromised. And on top of that, when people perceive social exclusion, fMRI studies show this heightened activation in the amygdala and the brain's fear pathways.
So being left out literally registers in the brain as a threat, not just a social slight, but like a real danger to your survival.
That's right. The brain interprets social exclusion as a survival threat. It's an ancient adaptive response. And for adolescents, this is amplified dramatically.
Why is that?
Their dopamine reward system is hyperactive. It makes social rewards feel intensely gratifying, like winning a small lottery every time they get a like. But the prefrontal cortex, the part that governs impulse control and rational decision-making, it doesn't fully mature until the mid-20s.
Ah, so you have this imbalance, a hypersensitive reward system with a still developing braking system.
And that amplifies the impulsive, compulsive checking we see in young people. It creates a vulnerability that the digital world just perfectly exploits. And the consequences are, well, they're paradoxical.
How so?
Despite striving so desperately for connection by checking all these feeds, high FOMO strongly predicts loneliness and social disconnection. This is what the literature calls the digital paradox.
That's just a tragedy of misplaced effort. You end up chasing quantity over quality, prioritizing these superficial digital connections over real, meaningful, emotional closeness.
And that chase follows us right into bed. We see massive sleep disruption. The anxiety drives what's called bedtime procrastination, where you consciously put off sleep because you feel like you have to check just one more time.
And then your brain is just racing, right? Cognitive pre-sleep arousal.
Exactly. The data shows that a significant 45% of teenagers experience measurable sleep deprivation because of FOMO-driven social media use. And that translates directly to poor academic performance and increased irritability.
And it goes beyond lost sleep. The anxiety from FOMO seems to push people towards some real-world risks. What did the research find about behavioral risk-taking?
We see very clear links. FOMO is a positive predictor of using alcohol as a coping mechanism. It's associated with elevated binge drinking in adolescents. It even predicts health risk-taking behavior in clinical populations, like those with alcohol use disorder.
So FOMO drives poor decision-making because that immediate reward of belonging feels more important than the long-term risk.
It completely outweighs it in the moment. And the risk isn't just internal, it impacts our physical safety. The research highlights the danger of inattention due to phubbing.
Phubbing, snubbing real people for your phone.
Right. And when you're compulsively checking your phone while you're walking or driving, the research shows a measurable increase in injury risk because your attention has literally been hijacked.
And on the most sobering note, we really have to address the mental health findings here. This isn't just about disappointment. It's linked to some serious pathology.
It is. The FOMO score is a positive predictor of self-harm and suicidal ideation in adolescent and college samples. One study, a comprehensive meta-analysis, showed that higher FOMO scores predicted increased rates of both self-harm and suicide.
Wow.
It just demonstrates that the emotional distress caused by this feeling of deprivation and constant upward comparison it's more than just passing sadness. It can contribute to serious mental health crises.
Okay, so given all of these measurable and frankly scary consequences, we have to look toward solutions. First off, how do scientists even quantify a feeling like the fear of missing out?
They use a standardized tool, the Fear of Missing Out Scale, or FOMOS. It was developed by Przybylski and his colleagues, the same team that formalized the definition.
And this tool works across different cultures.
It does. It's universally applicable. It's been validated in China, Indonesia, Persia, which proves that this emotional construct is experienced globally. It measures two key things: the fear of missing novel information and, maybe more potently, the fear of missing social opportunities.
So once you can measure it accurately, you can start to treat it effectively.
Exactly.
So that tool is crucial. But what happens when we use it to find solutions? What are the evidence-based strategies that you, the listener, can use to take back control?
We turn immediately to two main areas. First, mindfulness. Research clearly shows that mindfulness training, which is really just the practice of increasing your present moment awareness, is negatively correlated with FOMO.
How does being present stop you from needing to check what might happen in the future?
By focusing on the now, you dramatically reduce your reactivity to things that aren't here, like notifications. You're sort of creating a psychological shield against the anxiety that comes from imagining what you might be missing.
The urge to check doesn't control you if you're focused on what's right in front of you.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then there are structured therapeutic techniques, like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT.
How does CBT help?
CBT is highly effective because it directly targets the core negative thought patterns. One key technique is called cognitive restructuring.
Okay.
This involves actively challenging those unrealistic, often catastrophic thoughts you have when you think you're missing out. You learn to stop accepting the lie that the party on Instagram is perfect, and you replace it with rational thought.
So you're challenging the why. What about the compulsive action of checking?
For the behavioral side, we use a technique called exposure and response prevention, or ERP. It's often used for obsessive-compulsive behaviors. It involves deliberately triggering the urge to check your phone. Maybe you leave it in another room, but then you consciously resist that urge.
So you force your brain to tolerate the anxiety of not knowing. You prove to yourself that the world doesn't end if you miss a text.
You got it. You break the negative reinforcement cycle. Every time you check, you get a temporary hit of relief, which just strengthens the compulsion. ERP breaks that cycle.
And on a simpler level, what about things like a digital detox? Do you have to go completely cold turkey?
Full digital detoxes do produce a significant immediate reduction in FOMO, but for long-term management, the literature really suggests that digital minimalism is more sustainable.
So just more intentional, purposeful use of technology.
Right. And simple strategies work wonders. Disabling non-essential notifications, using scheduled social media use.
So instead of constant reactive checking, you set aside, say, 15 minutes at a specific time, and that's it.
Exactly. And if we connect this all back to self-determination theory, what we're trying to do is rebuild those core needs. The protective factors that buffer against FOMO are a genuine feeling of social connectedness, real emotional closeness, and a strong sense of coherence.
The sense of coherence.
Yeah.
That's the feeling that life is structured, comprehensible, and manageable, right?
It is. When you feel in control of your own narrative, you are far less vulnerable to the perceived perfection or excitement of everyone else's digital story. Building real-world competence and autonomy inherently reduces your susceptibility to this kind of anxiety.
So what does this all mean? We started with just a nagging feeling, and we've ended up with a full neurological and psychological roadmap.
I think our key takeaways are pretty clear. Takeaway 1. The root of FOMO is not frivolous. It's driven by ancient, unmet human needs for belonging, competence, and control. The digital environment just created the perfect weapon to exploit them.
Takeaway 2. The cost is measurable, and it is serious. FOMO is linked to anxiety, depression, sleep loss, and even measurable structural changes in the brain's striatum. This is a clinical concern, not just a cultural trend.
And our third takeaway, the solutions are actionable. Things like mindfulness, cognitive restructuring, and digital minimalism provide a proven path to break that cycle of compulsive checking and anxiety by consciously rebuilding your own sense of internal control.
If we connect this to the bigger evolutionary picture, the research reminds us that the fear of social exclusion was once absolutely adaptive. It kept our ancestors safe. It made sure they stayed with the group to survive.
And the great irony is that technology has taken that deep-seated adaptive psychological mechanism and has basically weaponized it into a modern anxiety epidemic. The fear is the same, the fear of being excluded, but the environment is just radically unnatural and unsustainable.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you to consider. If FOMO naturally decreases with age as the prefrontal cortex matures and our impulse control improves, is the true solution to navigating modern digital life simply patience, just waiting for our brains to develop? Or must we consciously and deliberately engineer our environment now to give our youth the self-regulation abilities their biology naturally lacks in this hyper-stimulated world? Something to consider next time you hear that notification chime.